Okay, everyone. So we're going to review independent group designs or types of these designs. Most of the examples we've gone over, or you probably been exposed to, are this kind of design, where you have two different groups experiencing two different conditions, at least two, in your experiment. Right? So keep that in mind. I have these images here kind of to help us visualize that, right? We have survival in the desert versus survival in the jungle. Actually, that's not really jungle. It's more like a forest. But the point is, if I'm looking at that and I have an independent group design, I would have two different groups of people in each condition. On top, you can see we have a different group than the bottom condition of the desert. So keep that in mind when we're dealing with independent group design. We have different conditions and we have different people in those different conditions. So let's go ahead and review this in terms of, let's go ahead and review material that you'll need to know to be able to kind of process and understand where we're going. We've reviewed this before, but here's a refresher. A level of a variable is a different sub-levels of that variable. Like if you think of, for example, time of day. If that was my variable, right, time of day, the levels for time of day might be morning or afternoon. Or it might be 8 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m. You might be asking, well, I don't get it. Where are you getting those numbers? I'm making those up. That's where I'm getting them. I'm interested in comparing the morning performance to later in the day, how students perform in my class. You decide for some reason that you want to understand these different conditions or these different levels of this independent variable. So that's the levels. Keep that in mind that when you have one IV, let's go with time of day again, the levels match up with conditions. It means they're referring to the same thing. It doesn't mean the same thing, but they're referring to the same thing. You'll have the same number of levels as you have conditions when you have one IV. You might be asking, why does this matter? You'll probably go through this whole video and it won't be clear why I keep emphasizing this. You'll see when we go into examples that make use of more than one IV. Right? So just keep that in mind though. For now, it seems like I'm using levels and conditions interchangeably, but they mean different things. Levels are referring to the specific variable, and within that variable, how many variations do you have? How many times of day do you have? Conditions are the situations a participant can participate in a single experiment. So let's go over this example. Okay, so on the right, I have caffeine. That's my IV. And I have level 1 being 5 cups of caffeine. Another level, let's call it level 2, 1 cup. And then decaf for a third level, right? So I have an IV with 3 levels, 5 cups, 1 cup, or decaf. And in this experiment, because I only have one IV, you have 3 conditions. If I had time of day and caffeine, morning, afternoon, and 5 cups in the morning, 5 cups in the afternoon, that's 2 conditions. 1 cup in the morning, 1 cup in the afternoon, that's another 2 conditions. One cup of decaf, 1 cup in the morning, 1 cup of decaf in the afternoon, that's another 2. So you'd have 6 conditions if I added that second IV. So just keep that in mind. Refer back to this if you later on get confused about that, but just keep that in mind. Another thing to note, in your book, they use things like group 1, group 2, condition A, condition B. This is referring to the different conditions in the study consistently. So for example, if I only have a coffee and decaf level for my IV of caffeine, condition A might be caffeine, condition B might be decaf. So that's what these conditions are referring to, right? They're referring to the conditions in the experiment, and they use A and B as placeholders. So let's go over this design. Here we have a 2-level or IV, a 1 IV design with 2 levels. We have morning or afternoon, and the DV is attention, right? Even if I didn't have that DV stated below, you should be able to tell that I have 1 IV with 2 levels. And even if I didn't have time of lecture, right? Let's say I just had morning and afternoon, well, you would know, like, it looks like you have 2 different levels related to time, right? So dissect this, start to understand what this means. Here you have 1 IV, 2 levels, 2 conditions. The DV is given to you below. That is attention. Now let's say we had this design, right? So here is what I was referring to in that example. I should have pulled this up earlier, but here hopefully this visual helps you understand what I was referring to earlier. Once you add that second variable, you're dealing with more conditions. Before, when I had the simpler example with 1 IV, levels and conditions seem to mean the same thing. Here, hopefully, it makes it clear that it's not the same thing. Time of lecture, the levels are morning and afternoon. Caffeine, the levels are 5 cups, 1 cup, or decaf. Conditions are all the situations that come from crossing the levels of your IVs. So I'm not going to go over all of them, but for example, morning and 5 cups is 1 condition. Overall, you have 6 conditions. Okay, so actually, just to drill it into the ground, here are the examples we're going to go over. We're going to have examples with 1 IV, 2 levels, and a single DV. In this case, the levels do match up with conditions. They don't mean the same thing, remember, but we have 2 levels, we have 2 conditions because we have 1 IV. The first type of independent groups design, and remember, independent groups means the participants only experience 1 condition, or in this kind of example, 1 level of your IV, right? Post-test only means that they get measured on the DV once after they get exposed to the IV. So again, post-test only means that first they experience the IV, so either level 1 or level 2. I need to change that. Condition 1 or condition 2. And then you get the measure of the DV. Now keep in mind that even before you expose them to the IV, there's one step missing here. You would randomly assign them into condition 1 or condition 2. So just to reiterate, first, randomly assign them to condition. So randomly assign the participants to condition 1 or condition 2. And then they experience condition 1 or condition 2. They experience the IV. Remember, they have to experience that first. And then you measure the DV. Now, this aspect of random assignment, that's necessary to make a causal claim. Keep that in mind. You need that random assignment. You need that. this kind of design meets the 3 rules of causation, right? That's kind of why I'm emphasizing random assignment. That's why I'm emphasizing that the IV came before the DV. So in this situation, you have that comparison group, so you can satisfy covariance. In other words, you can detect a difference in the DV across the 2 groups, across your IV. So using the coffee example, if you only had a coffee group, you can't say anxiety is higher when caffeine is there versus when it's not there without that comparison group. You need that comparison group to be able to say, okay, when caffeine is there, people are more anxious than in the control group when caffeine is not there. And then in that situation, in this type of design, the IV comes before the DV, right? They get exposed to caffeine and then you measure the DV. And that last one regarding internal validity, right? That you establish internal validity. You do that because you control for potential confounds to avoid threats to internal validity. So in addition to using this design, you would think about, well, are there any potential third variables? Is there anything in their experience that might provide an alternate explanation other than caffeine leading to more attention or more anxiety? If it was time of day, well, then you would address that. We discussed that previously. So for example, you might say, okay, let me make sure that time of day is not impacting attention, if that's your DV. Let's make sure everybody is participating at 8 a.m. Now, they might all be sleepy at 8 a.m., but if you find a difference, if you find that the caffeine group is more awake than the decaf group, they all went at 8 a.m., there's still a difference. There was still an impact on caffeine, and you can't say it was time of day because everybody was participating at 8 a.m., right? So you can't say that that time of day provides an alternate explanation because it doesn't. You held that constant, you ruled that alternate explanation out. And so you can see how this design satisfies all requirements for causation. So you do this, you can make a causal claim. Okay, so we have this design. Independent groups post-test only. Randomly assign them to condition 1 or 2, then measure the DV. But now we have this design. So this is still independent groups, meaning that they only experience condition 1 or 2. But now you have a measurement before and after. So now this is called independent groups pre-test, post-test design, right? So it's pre-test, post-test because you test them before and after. You get a measurement of the DV before and after. And keep in mind, you still randomly assign, right? That's the first step. You still randomly assign them to condition 1 or condition 2. So just to help walk you through this, I have this SpongeBob illustration. Hopefully it works out. I recruited a bunch of Spongi. I feel like there should be a plural way of saying SpongeBobs. Okay, so I recruit all these SpongeBobs. And then I randomly assign them to groups. And I give one group, the top group, condition A, caffeine. And the bottom group, I give them decaf. And then I take a measurement of the DV, which is anxiety. Okay? And then I find the people in condition A, right? Remember, these were randomly assigned into condition A and B. The people in condition A seem to be more anxious than the people in condition B. That's fine. I use a post-test only design. You can do that. Or you can do this. Well, what if I didn't fully trust my random assignment? What if I had a difficult time randomly assigning participants and I want to make sure that before exposure to my IV, the two groups I created were equal, were comparable, right? So here, for example, these pictures represent kind of the average stress of the SpongeBob groups. They seem pretty comparable, right? I took a measure. They seem pretty chill. They seem relaxed. They seem like they're not stressed. Good. Now I know that any difference that comes after my IV is due to their experience with caffeine, right? Because they're the same before. So if I see any difference after, that can only be explained by my IV. And then this is what we find. Well, the people, the SpongeBobs who received caffeine are much more stressed than the people who had decaf, who remained pretty relaxed, right? So this would be pre-test, post-test. Still independent groups because they're only experiencing caffeine or decaf. And to me, that's key. When I hear independent groups, I hear or. They experience condition A or condition B. The condition one or the other, they do not experience both. So keep that in mind. That might be a way that helps you think about it, right? The independent groups is or, and when I get to within groups, keep in mind that I like to use and, right? Because in independent groups, they experience one or the other. In within groups, they actually experience both. So if this was a within groups design, the SpongeBob groups, actually you might have one group and they would experience caffeine and decaf. Okay. Oh, wait. Yes. So a benefit of this approach, of the pre-test, post-test, is that I can look at change over time, right? Not only is one benefit that I can establish that they're comparable at the beginning, right? That these groups are equal before my manipulation, before they get exposed to caffeine. I can also see, well, how much more stressed are they compared to before? What was that increase, right? So that's another benefit. Okay, so some benefits to post-test only is that you only have to do one measure. So in terms of how much you have to do as a researcher, it's easier, but then it also helps avoid the participant guessing what you're looking for, right? So if they guess, well, it seems like you're measuring anxiety, right? If they guess that, because they get the measurement before and after in the pre-test post-test design, maybe that changes their behavior. Maybe they're like, oh, I see what you're looking for. And maybe they'll work against your interests, or maybe they'll try and help you out. Okay, they're also a student. I can see they're a master's student. I know they're looking for this. Yeah, I guess I feel a little bit more stressed, right? So if you use this approach, the post-test only, you're less likely to get that. You're less likely to get participants guessing what you're looking for. Pre-test post-test design, I mentioned the benefits. You can establish that the two groups are comparable before they get exposed to your IV. And you can see change over time, right? So those are the two main benefits of the pre-test post-test independent groups design. All right, so I'll go over the within groups design in the next video. Again, let me know if you have questions. Email me, Zoom, office hours. You can even call me. You can even comment. I am here to help.